hello everyone, and thank you so much for coming back after the coffee break. And it's a very great honor to stand here to share with you something about automation to simplify the event-driven workflows with Argo events and Argo workflows. For me, my name is Lingxian, and I'm currently working for a Source Group as a cloud consultant. Maybe you haven't heard of the company before, and we are actually doing the cloud consulting globally, and we provide professional services for migrating, managing, and securing the cloud infrastructure and applications with enterprise customers in variety of industries like the banking, the finance, media, transport, and telecommunication. So for me, I've been working in cloud space for more than 10 years. And in the past decade, one of the things I feel very proud of is I had actually actively contributing to the two most popular open source projects in the cloud computing space, the OpenStack and the Kubernetes, because I know that many companies has built a product or solutions based on those two popular open source technologies. But today, we're gonna talk about something about Argo. Actually, the two sub-projects of Argo, the Argo events and Argo workflows. So we're gonna have an overview about their architecture. We're gonna talk about their features. And also, I will show you a demo based on a real use case, how to automate the product onboarding process step by step, from end user's perspective. And if the time permits, we will also take a look at the comparison with other alternatives. So Argo events and Argo workflows, as I mentioned previously, they are the two sub-projects of Argo. And Argo is a CNCF graduated project which was created in 2020. So besides Argo events and Argo workflows, there are also other two projects called Argo CD and Argo rollouts. So I believe most of you have, are already familiar with Argo CD, which is very popular in the GitOps world. So I mentioned that Argo is a graduated project. So being graduated means the project has met some criteria of healthy growth and adoption, and also in high standards for security and compliance. So Argo events, it's an event-driven automation framework, and Argo workflow is a container-native workflow engine. And they were both created and designed for Kubernetes, so which we call that Kubernetes native projects. The two components are actually, implemented as a Kubernetes operator, and they both provide a UI and a command line interface. And actually, the two components can be running independently, but there is great benefit if you use them together to achieve, more complex application, complex workflows. Their use case they can support the CI/CD pipelines, or they can be used for the machine learning workflows. So let's take a look at Argo events first. This is the architecture of Argo events. So as I mentioned before, the Argo event is actually a Kubernetes operator. So if you are familiar with operator, you know that each operator can offer many customized resources. We call the CRDs, right? So there are three important customized resources in Argo events, which are the event source, event bus, and the sensor. So which means as an end user, you actually need to create and manage those resources in order to set up your automation workflow. For example, as a user, we can create an event source. And after the resource is created, the event source controller is responsible for creating an event source deployment behind the scenes. And the event source deployment is actually responsible for listening to the messages or events from either from either the Kubernetes cluster or from the services, externally. For example, the cloud services like PubSub, like the AWS SNS, SQS. So after receiving the messages, the event source deployment will transmission the messages to an event bus. And the event bus is actually created based on the event bus resource definition. And on the other end, we have the sensor, which is, again, a customized resource. And the sensor just defines how you want to receive the messages and how you want to trigger something. So for example, you want to trigger the Argo workflow, or you want to trigger a AWS Lambda function, or you can even create some resources in the Kubernetes cluster. So this architecture still looks very complex, right? Because as an end user, we only need to care about the event source and the sensor, and we can leave everything else to Argo events. So we only need to create event source if we really want to get some messages from some internal or external systems, and we only need to create a sensor if we want to trigger something. So this is Argo events. And because the event source and the sensors are the two most important concepts in Argo events, so the Argo events, by default, it provides some built-in support for both the event source and sensors. You can see from the list here, like the popular cloud services like the AWS SNS, SQS, GCP, PubSub are all supported. And also, there are some open source projects also supported. And the same for the sensor. You can, for example, you can trigger either the AWS function or the Kafka messages, or you can even send messages to the Slack channel using the predefined sensors. And one of the things I feel very great for the Argo event is if you find, for example, you are working with some systems which is not supported in this list, you can even write your own code, you can implement your own event source and sensor, and run the implementation together with Argo events, and you can support your own systems, which is very, very flexible if you design the event-driven workflow. So the Argo workflow. If you are more familiar with some cloud services like the AWS step function or the GCP workflow or the Azure logic app, so you can think of Argo workflows as the open sourced version of those cloud services. But the only thing that is different is Argo workflow was designed for Kubernetes. It's running on Kubernetes cluster. So in Argo workflow, we actually need to define the workflow template. And there are two types of the template. One is the steps workflow, and the other one is a DAG workflow. The DAG stands for the directed acyclic graph, so which is a very common concept in the workflow engine design. So in the steps workflow, we actually split multiple tasks into different groups, and we can run the groups one by one in sequence. But in each group, there could be one or more tasks that could be executed in parallel. On the contrary, for the DAG workflow, we actually need to define the relationship or dependencies between different tasks. And the Argo workflow is responsible for analyze the dependencies between different tasks and run them one by one based on our requirements. So which means in the DAG workflow, there could be multiple entry points, and there could be multiple end tasks. So as you can see here, I think for the DAG workflow is more suitable for the complex workflows, right? You only need to focus on the dependencies between the tasks. But for the steps workflow, it's more suitable for some simple use case. But the benefit of using steps workflow is it's very clear to see the order of the tasks, right? It's very suitable for the simple scenario. So here I want to show you a demo. And this demo is actually coming from a real use case from a client that I've engaged with last year. So this company is actually a very mature cloud user, and it has adopted the GitOps methodology internally. So inside the platform layer, they have defined many customer resources. And as part of the product onboarding workflow, the feature team needs to propose several pull requests in different repositories to create some resources. And based on the resources, there are different operators running inside the GKE cluster, which is responsible for set up something for the application. For example, one application may have the requirement to access some Google Cloud services. So there is the operator needs to be responsible for enable some GCP API, and also needs to grant some permissions for the service. And also, some operators need to set up the bounding between the Kubernetes service account with the GCP service account, and using some workload identity federation. So this process is actually already automated, and it works well. But the thing is, the product onboarding process is still tedious, and also it's time-consuming and error-prone. Because in order to onboarding a new product, the feature team needs to figure out what's the dependencies, what's the relationship of each resource in different repositories, and they need to read different PRs in different locations, and then it needs to go through the review process by the platform team. And then based on the feedback, maybe the feature team needs to do some modification and then go through the process again, right? To simplify and automate the whole process, we introduced Argo events and Argo workflows last year. So with the new solution here, they're going to be a single repo. And so in order to onboarding a new product, the feature team only needs to raise a PR in a single repo and creating some very simple resources. And based on the resources, the Argo events and Argo workflows, we're going to working behind the scenes and automatically do something. For example, all the stuff, setting up the enable GCP API, set up the permissions, and set up the boundings between service accounts. So now let's jump into the console. So in this demo, I will go through the whole process from installing Argo components and to the CRD definition, and then as a feature team, we just simply create some resources and then trigger the workflows. So you can see you get a basic understanding of the whole process here. Is that clear enough? Okay, so the first step, for example, we are acting as a platform team. So now we need to create different namespace because we're gonna install Argo. We're gonna install Argo events and Argo workflows. So we're gonna create two different namespace, one for Argo and one for the user-defined resources. So we're gonna create a namespace called Argo, another namespace called auto onboarding. And then next, we're gonna install Argo. And here, I just use the customization. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this great tool, which is very similar to Helm chart, but I think customization is much more powerful. So if we take a look at the customization here, so this is the definition of the customization file. So here I just reuse the community-provided customization to install Argo events and Argo workflows. I just specify the specific version. And also I specify a role bounding to give permissions for Argo events and Argo workflows, because in order to run the workflow, in order to listen to the events from the cluster, it needs to have some permissions to have access to those resources, right? So it should be very clear here. So now we're gonna install Argo events and Argo workflow. From the output, it's a little bit slow here, yeah. So first, it's gonna install some CRDs, which we mentioned previously. So the CRD here is for Argo. It's not for our application. It's for Argo, because if you still remember the diagram previously, the Argo events and Argo workflows just introduced some customized resource, like the event source, the sensor, event bus, right? So these are the CRDs here. And also, they're gonna create some deployments for Argo events and Argo workflows. So now we have Argo running, right? And next step is we're gonna create an event bus. Because an event bus is the work in the middle, like to transmission of the messages. Because after receiving the messages, the Argo events needs to send the event to the event bus, and so that the sensor on the other end can receive the messages and trigger workflow. So here we just simply create an event bus. And we can also take a look at the event bus definition. It's simple. It's just to create a customized resource called event bus, and we specify very simple parameters. So now we have the event bus. The next step would be to create the CRDs. So the CRDs here is actually for the feature team. Because we need to, for example, to onboarding a new product, we need to introduce two different customized resources. One is product, and the other one is the subscribed offerings. Because with these two definitions, to onboarding a new product, the feature team only needs to create a new product resource and create a subscribed offering resource. What the subscribed offering do is to define something that it should be associated with product. For example, to define the permission granting, right? To define the APIs should be enabled for the product. So we actually have two CRD defined in the CRDs folder. One is product, and in the product there are simple fields like the product name and a description, which is very simple. And in the subscribed offering, we actually also there's a very simple definition. In the properties, we only need to define a product ID and offering ID. So this is an association definition for the product. So which means if you create a product and you associate a subscribed offerings to this product, you're gonna grant some permissions, or you're gonna enable some APIs, you're gonna do something towards the product. So we have the CRD definition ready. And the next step would be we need to create config map that is gonna be used by the workflow. Because we only define the product, we define the subscribed offerings, but what is actually included in the subscribed offerings? We're going to define a config map, which is going to be read by the workflow. I can show you the config map later on. So we have this config map, and we can take a look at the config here. So here I just use config map for the definition of the stuff needs to be granted for the product. For example, I define the role boundings here because in order to onboarding a product which needs to read or write messages to GCP PubSub, we need to grant several roles, predefined roles to this product. And also, in order to access the GCP PubSub service, we have to enable the PubSub API, right? So we have the config map created, and next, we need to create an event source and sensor, right? Because we have installed Argo, we have created the event bus, we created the CRDs for our feature team, and now we need to create the event source and sensor. And the event source just to tell the Argo events that we're gonna be interested in the events from the subscribed offering resource. And the sensor is, after receiving the message, receiving the events, we're gonna trigger a workflow. So if we take a look at the event definition. Oh, not here, events. So this is the event source definition. So we just simply tell Argo workflow that we're only interested in the adding event for this resource. So which means when there is a new subscribed offering created in the cluster, we're going to trigger something. And the workflow, and trigger which workflow is defined in the sensor. Because in the sensor, you only need to care about this line here. So that means after receiving the events for the subscribed offering, we're going to trigger this workflow, right? So we have the event source and the sensor created. And next step would be create the workflow template, because we need to define the workflow, right? So we're going to create a workflow template. And for the demo purposes, I'm not going to, to read line by line for this workflow template because it's very complex. But we can take a look. So in the workflow template, we actually define, many steps, because here I just use the steps type of workflow. And in each step, I just define the things that this task should be executed. So again, you don't need to care about what it does here. So basically, the workflow is actually reading the config map we defined just now, and then analyze the information defined in the config map, and then just run the definition. For example, we should enable the roles. We should to enable the GCP API. So this is the thing that this workflow template defines. And now we have defined everything as platform team. And now it's turn for the product team to actually create the product and to define the subscribed offerings, which is very simple because the only thing that the product team or feature team needs to do is to create a resource for product and a subscribed offering. If we take a look at the definition here, so there is a new product named test product, and also we specify the offering ID that pops up to this product, which means now we're going to onboarding a new product. Its name is test product, and we're going to grant several roles, some permissions to this product, and also we have to enable some GCP APIs for this product. So after the subscribed offering is created based on the definition of the event source, there should be a workflow created. So we're going to have a look. You can see that workflow is already running. And if we take a look at the detail of this workflow, we can see there are already some tasks has been finished. And also from the output, you can see it's a steps workflow because each task is executed one by one. And if we run the command again, we can see here, this is a group of tasks. And inside the group, there are actually three tasks running in parallel. Because if you remember that we have defined some rule boundings for this product in the config map. So there should be 3 tasks running to grant permissions to this product. So if we keep querying, the workflow is still running. And if we give it some time, so another thing you can see here is for each task, because as we mentioned previously, Argo workflow, Argo events is actually designed for Kubernetes. So in order to run tasks, Argo workflow is actually creating some pods in the cluster, and each pod is responsible for running some specific task. It's almost done. This is the only task left. And you can also see from the message here, the state is pod initializing, which you must be very familiar if you worked with Kubernetes before. Yeah, it's done. And the last step here is because I'm trying to give you a real demo. So I have defined a matrix for this workflow, which means after workflow is finished, either it's successful or it's failed, it needs to trigger some metrics to Prometheus so that as operation team or platform team, we are able to see either some alerts, for example, if a workflow is failed, or we can see some metrics from the dashboard. Okay, the workflow is finished, and we can list again to see the status is succeeded. And also, now if we take a look at the subscribed offering, because the feature team know nothing about the whole process here, so how does the feature team know that my application is ready? So the only thing that the feature team needs to do is to describe the subscribed offering. After the workflow is finished, from the status of this resource, we can see, okay, we have workflow, is finished, and the status here is succeeded. So as a feature team, I know that everything is ready for my product. Now it's my turn, to actually deploy something inside the cluster. Okay, so this is the demo for today. We are running out of time, unfortunately. So actually, the next slide is going to be take a look at alternative, because we know that Argo workflow is definitely not the only option in the market. So there are many other alternatives. I just group those alternatives into 3 categories. Either open source solutions or the Kubernetes operator, and also you have the choice to use the cloud managed services. So there are actually many open source solutions out there, especially the one is the Apache Airflow, which is very, very popular in the workflow engine field. But there are 2 differences between those open source solutions and Argo. One is, for those open source projects, you have to define the workflow using the code. You have to actually write in Python or Golang to define your workflow, right? The other thing is Argo events and Argo workflows are actually created for Kubernetes. It's running on Kubernetes natively, but with Apache Airflow, other options, they can be run in the CS architecture, CS model. So you need to choose where you need to run those servers in order to run your workflow. You can also write Kubernetes operator, but that means you're actually recreating the wheels, because you are actually recreating another Argo events, another Argo workflows, which is not a very good choice. And the third option is you can use cloud managed services, like the AWS Step Function, the GCP workflow, the Azure Logic App. But the thing is, if you're using those cloud services, you actually logged in with those resources, right? It's very hard to migrate your workflow from one cloud to another. But if you use Argo workflow, it's just running on vanilla open Kubernetes cluster. If you are running cluster in AWS, it could work. If you're running your cluster in GCP, it could work as well. Okay, so these are things I want to share for today, and I'm sorry that I have to rush in the last slides. But if you are really interested in know more about the Argo, and I'm very happy to answer. You know how to find me in LinkedIn. So yeah, hope you enjoy enjoy today. Thank you. Yeah.